Coming up next on Behind the Curtain, inspired by the Harlem Renaissance, CTH's Carl Cofield and Ty Jones collaborate on The Weary Blues, a poem by Langston Hughes.
Droning a drowsy, syncopated tune, rocking back and forth to a mellow croon, I heard a Negro play. Down on Lenox Avenue the other night, by the pale, dull pallor of an old gas light, he did a lazy sway. He did a lazy sway to the tune of those weary blues. With his ebony hands on each ivory key, he made that poor piano moan with melody. Oh, blues. Swaying to and fro on his rickety stool, he played that sag, ragged tune like a musical fool. Sweet blues, coming from a black man's soul. Oh, blues. Coming from a black man's soul. In a deep song voice with a melancholy tone, I heard that Negro sing that old piano moan. Ain't got nobody in all this world, ain't got nobody but myself. I's gonna quit my frowning and put my troubles on the shelf. Thump, thump, thump when his foot on the floor. He played a few chords and then he sang some more. I got the weary blues and I can't be satisfied. I got the weary blues and I can't be satisfied. I ain't happy no more and I wish that I had died. And far into the night he crooned that tune. The stars went out and so did the moon. The singer stopped playing and he went to bed while the weary blues echoed through his head.
Hey, Carl, how are you this evening?
I'm doing great, Ty Jones. It's really great to be talking to you in light of
as well. Listen, I'm honored actually to have this conversation with you. And as people may have just seen, the piece that we had done together of the Weary Blues, it may come as a surprise to some folks about how proficient you are at the blues harp. When did you start that?
You know, it's one of those things that is a skill I tried to pick up as an actor. You know, you're always encouraged to play an instrument, right?
That's right.
It can prolong your career. It can help you get different gigs. And I was fortunate enough to work with a lot of blues musicians on a piece called Polk County at Arena Stage many, many years ago. And I got to work with Cephas and Higgins, which is a blues combination, John Cephas and Phil Wiggins. And Phil Wiggins is a virtuoso on the harmonica. And I have just been enamored with it for a long time and said, this is going to be like a private tutorial. I get to see the master up close and personal, and he was very generous with his time. So it's something I've just tried to incorporate a little bit. I'm a rank amateur, but I do love the tradition and I love the music.
And about how many harps do you have? How many harmonica? Is there a distinction between a harmonica and a blues harp? Are they the same thing, or?
Well, you know, they're the same thing. They're the same instrument. They're just used in different positions. So right here, I have my harmonica case that I travel with. Gotcha. And if we open it up, we see that I have a lot of different keys I can play in depending on what the band is playing in. So traditionally, you're going to play cross harp, which is the second position on the harmonica, which gives it that nice bluesy feeling. So I use it as a blues harp.
Yes.
To get that down home gritty feel to it, which appeals to me. It sounds like the music I grew up around.
Hmm.
So I definitely have an affinity for it, and something that I'm pretty passionate about.
And it seems like it fits well into the theme of the Harlem Renaissance as well, that bluesy feel.
Without a doubt. I think there's no better music or perhaps than gospel that encapsulates the journey and struggle of people coming to look for a better life. So the Great Migration, for example, where people were coming up from North Carolina to New York or from Mississippi to Chicago in search of a better life. There's something about that blues feel, the blues harmonica and gospel and field hollers that is just so authentic to our shared experiences as people looking for something better in life. So, I'm going to pivot for a quick second and say the Weary Blues. As the artistic director of Classical Theater of Harlem, living in the cultural capital that is Harlem, what do you think, how does the Weary Blues and the poetry and the art of the Harlem Renaissance resonate now with you in the 21st century?
I think that I'm kind of someone who likes to choose plays and choose projects that sort of comment on the time in which we live. And I think that the theme of the Harlem Renaissance has been a thread this year. And it's one of those things that we often think about how much the past informs what's going on right now. How does one think about these issues 100 years later when it comes to the Renaissance? So I am, in my studies, what I've seen is that there were several things that were going on 100 years ago that still are talked about today. I think given what's going on in the world right now, one of the things that was talked about back then was healthcare. All right. And there was a lot of work to provide and improve the wellness options of the early 20th century. And because of that work that was being done, it placed Harlem at the center of local and national politics. Black folks and allies of Black folks recognized that the racist attitudes of the time limited health options, and they had to find a way to consolidate that political power and demand from the city and demand from the state access to care. And I say that, and I would say that those issues around healthcare today are undoubtedly at their zenith. Now, in terms of choosing works, when it comes to things like the Weary Blues and how that was a piece that was that talked about the time, 100 years ago. I like to choose works that comment on what's going on today. And I'm, again, thankful for this gem called the Weary Blues. For me, Langston wrote about a world that was around him, giving voice to a Black community whose everyday existence was always under siege. And I think that this shows how art is a necessary form of expression. He used poetry, he used language, he used words as his weapons to talk about the world as it was then.
That's beautiful. And I think to piggyback on what you're talking about, how Langston's work sort of made the mundane special. So the working people were put in this glorious sort of light that we examined. People that we might pass in the street and take for granted, he gave a real meaning to in his work. And I wonder, if he were alive now, during what's going on in Harlem and how the pandemic has hit our community especially hard, what the writing would be like. Something tells me, and that's sort of a leading question, but something tells me it would be just as poignant, just as urgent, and just as holistic, thinking about all of us together. The weakest of us, is just as important as the most, esteemed of us.
That's right. And, Hughes was somebody throughout his whole career that crafted his writings to communicate about these sort of complex inequities, right? And the vernacular that he used at times was nuanced, but yet the language that he wrote was always accessible, no matter what, no matter who read it. Everyone understood. They were able to connect. They were able to tether themselves to what was going on. And I got to say that the shows that you direct, take classic plays and deftly makes them relevant to audiences young and old. So, we understand, thankfully, how Hughes used his craft. Well, how do you craft your work so well, so beautifully, that these plays written centuries ago still matter?
Well, thank you first and foremost for saying that. I have to say that I'm tremendously grateful and owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude for your leadership to bring these institutions, an institution like the Classical Theater Harlem, to be around to give artists a platform to try and share their art. That being said, man, I will say that I'm deeply humbled, and it's going to sound cliche, but we stand on the shoulders of the people who came before us, right? First and foremost, obviously our nuclear families, our parents, the people who made sacrifices for us to, be in a position to make art. So I'm deeply, deeply grateful for those opportunities. I try and say that we have a responsibility as artists, and especially as artists of color, to make art that is truthful, that shows our people in a different light. We're not this, myopic view of people. We're complex people. We're complex ideas. And so for me, the beauty about working on things like the Greeks, working on Shakespeare, working on these classical texts, what still makes them relevant to this day, 4, 5, 6, 700 years later, is that they're asking really big questions and really big existential questions. And I think even now when we're suffering from crime rates that disproportionately affect us, inequities in wealth, in medicine, in educational opportunities, those big existential questions that people before us were writing about, it's a perfect time to re-examine them and see how far we've come, or if we haven't come that far at all.
That's
but
right.
to really, as they say, hold the mirror up to ourselves and examine who we are, who we want to be, and who we claim to be. So those are the questions, and I think you and I share that aesthetic in our art making, that why are we even doing this now? And what are we trying to say to our Harlem community and to the world in large as artists? Why does this matter?
Yeah. I think one of the other things that sort of resonates with me about the Weary Blues, particularly that piece that you chose for us to do, is that, Carl, it makes me think, of that homeless person that's on the train or the subway, but they sing like an angel, right? Right? They sing so beautifully that I even forget that I'm on the subway, right? I'm having a show right there for free. I go somewhere, and then it ends, right? And then I'm left with about that person that I see, like, what happened to them, right? How are they able to take, their state or their condition and turn it into something so beautiful? Or maybe it's cathartic for them. I don't know. But when I look at the Weary Blues, I'm imagining that Langston saw that. He saw these folks who, like you were saying earlier, the ones with the most challenges in the world. And somehow what they've done is that they used art to express where they were, whether it was pain or whether it was joy, right? And I also think what's beautiful about the Harlem Renaissance is that it wasn't just about art. There was great, social upheaval. There were great conversations and critiques about policy. And, it also sort of bridges me a little bit to thinking about Bird, right? That, he played, I think it was in one of the plays you directed with us, Dutchman, where the character talks about Bird playing, and that the reason why he played was to keep from killing folks, and sometimes I sit there and you think about the real value of art, or you think of the value of sport. This is our ways of expression, so we may still exist in a civil society. Right. We can't be without art. We can't. you know, like I said, you were the one that came up with this piece. For those of you out there who know Carl closely, he actually has a son named Langston. I mean, I imagine this piece not only resonates with you, not even him as the piece itself, but Langston as a man himself, who he was and what he stood for, must, you know, live and pierce you deeply. As you explained earlier about the power of who he was and what he represented in his time and how much he resonates today. So I'm curious when for a man and a woman to name their child, or for a couple to name their child, you know, after someone with such a presence in world history. Tell me what that is, you know, because it's
no, it's one of those things, Ty, that you marvel at not only the artist Langston Hughes, the poet, how he was able to navigate a world.
Yep.
And not let the bitterness destroy him utterly.
Amen.
To what you were talking about, to take the rinds and the dregs of what society gives you and to spin it on its head and make it beautiful, is something that is majestic. It's regal. And it's something that, you know, my wife and I definitely believe in, and that there is power in art.
Yeah.
And that, you know, just because the world is around us one different way, artists can make the world that they envision in their minds. And maybe, if we're fortunate, the society will catch up to the artist.
Amen.
And that's something that I know you and I have had these conversations offline, but there's a certain responsibility to be an artist.
I agree.
It's a privilege, and we are definitely privileged to be in a position to do this. But the name Langston, and when I look at Langston's body of work, it spoke to me as a young undergraduate. To be in a world and have this duality, right? That we have to be our authentic selves, but also navigate the pitfalls and landmines of a world that does not necessarily look like us, sound like us, express themselves like us. So to look at his body of work and the rich complexities of the man was something that really just resonated with us.
Yeah, I believe that W.B. Du Bois, and then, you know, a few decades later, Michael Eric Dyson called that, you know, the psychic doppelganger, having to, you know, exist in multiple worlds, you know. That's what Black folks had to do. You know, some people now call it code switching and stuff like that. But yeah, you know, reflecting on a piece like The Weary Blues, having you play, the honor of doing this piece with you, to be able to reflect on the Harlem Renaissance, to talk about this being our 20th year anniversary, and the power of how the past can, you know, really help us with answers that we need today. I think it's very humbling. It does show how far we have come along, or at least it keeps us in the inquiry about how far we have come along. And one of the things I've learned from you is that no matter what the circumstances are, it's always important to be cultural custodians. And I thank you for, you know, being on this journey as we, you know, do whatever we can to move people in profound ways and in pleasurable ways, and elevating the community in which we were founded. I wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind, would you mind taking out your harp and, you know, take us out for this first edition of Behind the Curtain?
You put me on the spot a little bit. I didn't warm up my chops, but
okay.
You know, I can blow a little bit.
All right, cool. Oh, here he is, ladies and gentlemen. Carl Cofield and the Blues Harp, playing the Weary Blues. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the staff and board of Classical Theater Harlem, stay safe, and we'll see you in the audience.
Hello, this is Andre Braugher. Over the years, I've had the pleasure of attending several productions produced by the Classical Theater of Harlem. The magic of theater has always been its power to change the way we look at ourselves and connect to the world around us. I and my family are so inspired by the Classical Theater of Harlem's mission that I've proudly become a trustee of the organization. Classical Theater of Harlem's work in Upper Manhattan utilizes public and private spaces to bring culture, commerce, and vibrancy to the uptown community. Their approach to telling these complex, rich stories enables us to recognize that our similarities are far more compelling than our differences. We value the impact it has on the community, and I'm committed to see it thrive and expand in the years to come. In celebration of CTH's 20th anniversary, we humbly ask to be part of your giving plans this season. We are launching our $20 for 2020 campaign, where we are asking supporters to make a recurring donation of $20 per month for the upcoming 2020 season. Your contribution supports emerging artists, empowers young designers, choreographers, and administrators, and ultimately, your contribution enables excellence. Please, join me in celebrating the work of the Classical Theater of Harlem.